We have just a few more minutes for more people to join, and then we're going to get going here. What do I want to ask the audience? I'm curious to know, what is the greatest way that you're impacted by this Christmas by COVID? Is it going to be that you're not going to be seeing people that you generally see? You're not going to be able to gather. I know that different jurisdictions has different rules. So if anyone wants to just share on their how Christmas is being impacted by COVID, that would be great. And who would like to talk to that? Oh, I see Chris is here. Mr. Cunningham. Well, hello. See, you might change my gallery view. So Derek, how is your Christmas being affected by COVID?
Hi.
He's my very good friend, Derek Cunningham. I can put him on the spot because we go back a ways.
We do. Our Christmas is affected by not being able to travel. We are travelers, and Christmas for us, as much as we do stuff with family and do all of those sort of things, we also like to get away at Christmas time. So if there had not been COVID this year, I'd be calling in from Mexico, probably. We'd probably be in Mazatlan or somewhere in Mexico, relaxing in the sun on the beach, and I'd have my iPad open, and we'd be joining you from a beach somewhere. So that's changed. We are here instead.
And for someone who I know loves to travel as much as you do, that must be painful.
It is tough, but we're okay. We're making it through.
Thanks for letting me throw you on the spot there, Derek.
Sure,
hey, Stan, good to see you. I'm just very appreciative of all the faces that I see. We're seeing some flashing over here because my daughter's taking pictures. Come say hello to the audience, Sarah. This is Sarah. Sarah, this is the world.
Hi, Sarah.
Oh, okay, we're going to wait one more minute because people generally join in at that point. And yeah, it's pretty crazy that, in some ways I don't really feel my life, of course my life's been impacted with COVID, but it not in the ways that I think that other people struggle with. I have a home-based business. I've had a home-based business for 8 years, and I didn't know I've been self-isolating for that whole time. And that's just kind of like, because I work at home so much, right? So that's not really a big change. And of course, being able to see people, and not be able to connect with them. So I see we have more people joining us, and we're at the magic time of 4 minutes past the hour. Welcome, one and all, to the Here to There show. I'm your host, Luc Bouchard. This is my 152nd web event since March 24th, and they're at least 90 minutes or longer. So it's been, I've done a lot of web events with the people that have showed up today. I think I'm at around 1,950 people that I've presented to, that have shown up for them. And a lot of the people that are here today are people that have joined me in the past, and I'm really grateful for that. When I decided I wanted to put on this, the Christmas edition, it was really about what can I do to give back to everyone that supported me in this and has shown up. So I talked to my good friend, Roberto Alice, who is with us there, he just put up his thumbs, and my good friend Ken Harding, and we decided to put this together and bring it. So I'm just going to get Roberto and Ken to quickly introduce themselves, and then we're going to continue from there.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to all of you. I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, Luke, for the kindness of putting this event together for all of us today, just a couple days before the holidays. My name is Roberto Alas, and I'm an international business relations consultant based in Edmonton, Alberta, originally from El Salvador. So we'll be talking a little bit about the differentiation factors on celebrating Christmas here in North America, whether it's in the States, Canada, the white Christmas, and how even in warmer countries, my friend Derek, I guess, Derek was saying that he and his family like to spend the Christmas in Mexico. Definitely Latin America is totally different than spending here. So I'm really looking forward to share with you all today in the spirit of Christmas. And thank you, Luke, for having me. I appreciate that.
Right on, right on. Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, greetings, everyone. As Luke mentioned, my name is Ken. I've served in Christian ministry of various kinds since the mid-1970s. Through the 70s and early 80s, I studied several disciplines at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. In the early 80s, I was ordained a priest in the Anglican Communion. I've had the joy, the pleasure, and sometimes the heartache of doing all kinds of ministry. And now I'm retired. I'm filling in my time by writing epic science fiction as a way of telling stories that I hope will point people in another direction. As Dame Hilary Mantel once said, if you want to tell the truth, write fiction. And occasionally I do pastoral work of various kinds. I'll tell you one thing I've never done is a live streaming broadcast on Zoom. So this is a new experience for me. You're all, I'm hoping you're all going to be patient. You're gonna see me make a few goofs before I'm through, I'm sure.
And that, if that should happen, we're all going to roll with it. And I have no fear of that happening, because what I've found by and large, the audience that comes here are not only very forgiving, but they're very, they understand how the stuff goes, can sometimes go off the rails. And I've made more than my share of faux pas during doing these webinars. I'm going to share a story of my childhood that is one of just something when I think of Christmas, and I asked Ken and Roberto to do the same thing. I think of my mother when I was 7 or 8 years old. She had just had back surgery. We were on welfare, and there was no presents coming in. There was nothing. The house was that we were renting was so cold. How cold was it? No, sorry. Anyway, the house we were renting was so cold that when we put the turkey on the floor in the kitchen, it froze the next night. This was a meager was just basically starting and whatnot. And I had my two brothers and my two sisters and my mother and some of our family and whatnot. But it was really, I didn't know any different. I had no idea what it could look like other than that, because by that point in time, we'd gotten out of foster care. My mother got us back from being in foster care, and I was with my brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of 5 children. And when I hear the stories as an adult, I look back upon it and go, wow, that's a really shitty Christmas. That's really not a lot of fun, and people should not go through that. But at the time, it didn't matter. And how we actually got presents was through a program, and Edmontonians here or Albertans on this call will know it. It's called Santa's Anonymous. And I don't know if I suspect they do that in other parts of the world, but here it's run by a radio station that was putting it on. Now it's a society. But we got presents at Christmas because someone basically gave to us, and they didn't even know us. They didn't know who we are, what we're about. They gave presents. And because I'm French Catholic, as my roots and my origin, what we would do is we would actually go to midnight mass on Christmas Day, I guess is at that point. We'd on Christmas Eve, we'd go to midnight mass, and then we would come home, and that's when we'd open up all their presents, and then we would have Réveillon. And Réveillon is Christmas dinner. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, we're eating Christmas dinner. Everything, the full thing on that. And that's, all what we put together. My mother, of course, had help. My siblings were older. We all did that together. But your perception is that when you look back upon something, you just kind of, it is what it is. But when you're in the middle of it, what was important? I was with my family. I was with my siblings. I was with my mother. Her health was getting better. We were out, foster care had not been that far. And we were in foster care for, I don't know, about a quarter of a year. It was long enough on that. So when I ask Ken and Roberto what they remember of Christmas, and I stop and ask myself, that's actually the first memory came through. And I realized I wasn't hopeless. I wasn't hopeless in my situation. I wasn't hopeless in what we're going through. I didn't know hopeless. I just know that, we had enough 7 or 8 Christmases, and it was the way it was. And often I think people get lost in what they think it should be versus what it is. And if we, times if we put less expectations on ourselves, or just be more in the moment, more in gratitude, I think it can be a whole lot different. So that's my Christmas story. Ken, Roberto, who would like to go next?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting Christmas that has it touched me deeply at the time. It continues to touch me deeply and shapes my perspective on a number of other things that I've encountered at different times since. And this occurred in the mid 1970s, and it was in Haiti. And I'm sure you all know a little bit about Haiti. It gets in the news fairly often for a small country. And I was there at the time wearing the hat of an anthropologist. I was studying the connection between the practice of voodoo and the institution of the Roman Catholic Church. But I was also there as a student of theology. And it was supposed to be an experience that would teach me about myself. Because sometimes, and I'm sure Luke's friend Derek, you would probably really understand this. When you are taken well away from what you're familiar with and put outside your comfort zone, you learn things not just about the circumstances out there, but you learn a whole lot about what's going on in here. And on this occasion, I was in Haiti. It was hot. It was humid. I had shared my bed for several nights with some kind of lizard, which the people told me was lucky and that I shouldn't do anything to scare it away. And Christmas came. And I was in a poor rural part of Haiti, down in the south, a region called Leneogan, and it's a sugarcane area, and the people work very, very hard for extremely little, and they were poor, and it showed. I'd go visiting in their houses, and I don't know if you can understand what it would be like to be in a house that's small, so small that I could not take probably more than 4 steps in any direction from the center of their house. The walls were of tin, the floor was of dirt, the roof was of tin with twigs and stuff stuck in holes so to slow down the drips of the water if it rained. And we were there for Christmas Eve. And the Anglican priest with whom I was acquainted had worked with me to put together something really special. I had brought with me a trunk, a veritable trunk full of presents that I had collected from people in Canada, the Montreal area, to bring so that on Christmas I would be able to play Father Santa Claus. And so I was there with the priest, and he carried a gas generator a long ways out into the bush where its noise wouldn't make too much of a distraction. He started that up. It powered a few colored lights, some of them that twinkled, which was fascinating for all the kids. They were all gathered around looking at the twinkling lights. And I opened the trunk and started handing out presents. And you can imagine my puzzlement and uncertainty of what to do. And one of the things I pulled out of the trunk was a pair of mittens, which I couldn't imagine anybody being able to use in Haiti ever. But what struck me was the fact that in the absence of all of the things that I normally associate with Christmas, I suddenly became very, very aware of the warmth of the people, of the way the season of Christmas and what it meant to them was touching them. They were joyous, they were excited, they were singing Christmas carols, and they were laughing and they were joking. And the Anglican priest with whom I was working, he had gone out and got bags of candy, and he was handing out candy and soft drinks, and everybody just had a good time gathered around these twinkling lights that were being powered by a generator off in the distance. And I was moved. I was moved by what was going on, and by the fact that it was going on genuinely, sincerely, and very effectively in the absence of all the things that I normally associated with Christmas. And it was the first time I experienced at that level what had only ever been something in my head before, which is that Christmas is more than Christmas trees, more than snow, more than feasts and those kinds of things. There's something deeper and more powerful that can touch people even in the most incredibly destitute circumstances and fill them with joy. And I hope that as your Christmas unfolds and whatever other celebrations you're enjoying, that you'll experience some of that same kind of joy, even though we have to be isolated, even though we have to be separated from loved ones and people that we care about. I hope that somehow the joy of the whole meaning of the season will touch you in a way like it touched me that night out there in Haiti.
Nice. You know, it's interesting, Ken, because I haven't been to Haiti or the Dominican Republic, so on that, and Haiti has, of course, is ravished with like a lot of tornadoes, hurricanes, and stuff like that. And when you said I was at a poor part of Haiti, I'm going, I didn't know that they weren't all poor. Like that's my perception of Haiti, is it's just such a poor country, even compared to the Dominican Republic on that. So, okay. So thank you, Roberto. Going further into, you know, the Latino Christmas. Let's hear it.
Let's take a trip. If we cannot go into an airplane, let's take an imaginary trip, all of us. I will take you guys for a couple of countries in Central and South America. Thank you for sharing, both of you. It was wonderful life stories. And that's something that we all need to remind ourselves, that truly this period of the season, the holidays, is about love, it's about family, it's about friends, and reappreciating the relationships that we have, and the love, and of course the time together. I will share with you guys how typically the Christmas time is in El Salvador, and also my experience in Colombia 3 years ago. And I will start also with a note that I was reflecting on just now, because the first memory came to my mind was all happiness, which is great. But I remember that there was maybe 1 or 2 years that it was during the conflict, the civil war in El Salvador, where Christmas time was different. If you can picture that for a kid growing up in a country where people were killing themselves, and you know, the terrific situation of a civil war. I recall that I don't remember. I can recall that there was a ceasefire during the Christmas time. That is something actually good, where people was on more ease during the holidays. That's why I don't have locally any bad memory about that, because there was a ceasefire during the Christmas time. Both bands respected that to the point that the population could have a good Christmas time. Typically how it is there, I remember that traditionally you attend mass as well, whether it's at 10 p.m. or midnight. But besides that, if you don't go to mass, what I do, actually, my family, everybody cooks a big meal, and typically the meals include a turkey or chicken made with this criollo sauce, which is a fusion of Spanish influence with pre-Columbian times of Mayans and peoples. And so the flavors on it is quite something good, to be honest with you. And so it's a big meal with rice and salads and all that. But also there's traditional meals, which is tamales. Also something that's called bread with turkey, which you put the bread with mayo and put the turkey on it. And the turkey has been cooked in this criollo sauce, and the sauce has to be hot after 5 hours of being cooking, and you put it on top of the bread with some other veggies on it. It's quite delicious. So what I typically do at the time I visited families, my friends and their families. And what's very interesting about that is it's a lot of music going on. Every household is playing some kind of music, Latin music, of course, some about Christmas music with a Latin hint, and some others more like a party music. Every household, and they have this big dynamite that they actually put it on the streets, and it sounds like almost like a bomb. And actually, sounds like it. You can see fog all over, because prior to midnight, both Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, people just go nuts on it. So you hear lots of loud explosions, and of course the gunpowder is on the air, so you smell all that too. It's quite different, but that's how the celebration is in anticipation to midnight. And one of the rules of my house particularly was that I need to be before midnight in my house. And so I have 5 households to visit, at least sometimes 10 in one night. And mainly I did that walking. And every house offers something for you, whether it's something to eat, something to drink, or both. And it was hard for me because I needed to have room to have dinner when I go back home. The beautiful thing about that is that everybody enjoys, and you need to receive that, because if you deny it, they will put it anyways for you. So you, at the end of the night, you have eaten already 7 to 10 times, if you can imagine that. And that's quite something. But the rule is you have to be with family prior to midnight. You can go out and visit with friends if you want after 1 a.m., but it's traditional that you have to be there. So I remember that very well. Of course, all the stuff that I ate, by the time that I get back home, as I was walking, I feel that I have some room still to eat. It was necessary for me to do that as well. And so it brings me a lot of good memories, because with family and friends, you like to visit everybody, and they really appreciated just you to stop by and to visit. And at the time, everybody's welcome. It's like you have a extended family. And my trip to Colombia, that was something quite neat that I experienced in Barranquilla, in Cartagena, in the Caribbean area of Colombia, 3-4 years ago. So for December 7th, they have something called Las Velitas, the candlelight night, where every household light up candles. And it's beautiful how every house has different candles light up in its entire party all over the city. And you go around, and it's people singing like Christmas carols in Espanol, of course, and praying and wishing just the very best, being thankful for the year that has ended, and wishing the very best for the new year to loved ones and significant others. So you can go in the neighborhoods and look around, and there's people that have from 25 candles, and others have hundreds of candles light up. And you see the entire city. Picture the city in every house having multiple candles light up in different colors, surrounded by different plastic colors around it, sometimes to reflect that candle light in a different color. But the beauty of it is that everybody do that. It's a way for everybody to synchronize and connecting. So yeah, that was a wonderful, wonderful experience as well. Every Latin American country doing their own way, but something that I can tell you that we have together is the sense of family, the sense of really spending time together, the sense of making feel everybody else welcome and make them feel like they are family as well, and to party. We are very loud when we are celebrating the Christmas time. So those are the memories I would like to share.
I'm curious. Has the commercialization really got down there with the Santa Clauses and everything? Has that taken root down there? Of how we envision Santa up here. It always surprises me when I see videos of Christmas in Florida and they have Santa and dressed up, and it's just like, So has that made it down there, Roberto?
That's a wonderful question. I forgot to mention that we are very Anglo influenced by the Americans, but Canadians, by the North American way they celebrate Christmas. As a matter of fact, we have figurines and display in different households, and you play the snow by putting cotton on it, like a cotton, bunch of cotton on it. So yes, Santa Claus, like the Santa Claus from Coca-Cola, very well known down there. The White Christmas, you have fake snow there, and people picture that way, even if it's in a tropical climate, right? And people, when you're a kid, people still believe in Santa Claus. So it's a lot of traditions that are very alike here. Of course, living now here in North America, I love a White Christmas, even if it's cold, something that I really enjoy, because since I was little, I grew up with that kind of lifestyle mentality. Even some of those things there were unreal for us in terms of weather, but the spirit of living into the Christmas traditions is very likable. Like here, it's very, very interesting. Even things that you give away, like chocolates or anything like that, it has on it pictures with the houses and snows or Santas on it, and that's very traditional to us, to be honest, as it is here in North America.
Right on. Right. Thanks, Roberto. The other thing that I've never done is I've never been away for a Christmas. So I think that would be pretty weird for me on that. And Ken, when you were doing your ministry work and whatnot, did you feel like you missed Christmas when you were down there, or was it just another day of the year?
No, I had moments when the sense of loss and the distance choked me up. And I had moments when I would have loved to have seen snow or a decorated Christmas tree, or to have been able to have an eggnog with a friend. And of course, none of that was available. And there were moments when I missed that incredibly, and it really hit me. It struck me because I didn't think I would. I thought, hey, come on, it's only once, and what does it mean? But I really felt it. Another thing that I really, really felt was the gap between what I was accustomed to and what I knew they were accustomed to, and that really struck me. But what is unforgettable and remains unforgettable and continues to affect me was the genuine joy, excitement, communal warmth that I experienced there as they celebrated Christmas with nothing. And that has just remained with me always.
Right. The confusion of a lot of presents with what it is, what the time of the year is, and that's marks and whatnot. And I'm mindful of Charlie Brown's Christmas, which I think was done in the 70s or the 60s. And back in the 60s, Charles Schwartz, the creator of Peanuts, was talking about commercialism. And that was on the radar in the 60s on that. So okay, well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to actually transition now into Ken giving your talk. And how many Christmases have you officiated over, Ken, in your career? Has it been as long as you've been Reverend, or
yeah, that's fair.
I always get this wrong. I always get it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
that's fair. I've probably, you end up, especially if you're a rural minister, as I was a lot of the time, you end up doing 4 services, sometimes as many as 5 or 6, but usually 4 over the space of a Christmas Eve. You might start at one end of your parish with your first Christmas service at somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock, and it'll be somewhere close to 2:33 in the morning by the time you get home after doing your 4th one. So I really couldn't tell you how many actual services I've done it, but I was ordained in 82, so
it's been more than 3. It's more than 3.
There's been a few.
Yeah, right. Wow, I never even considered the fact that you would do. I could see doing 2, but 3, 4, 5. Wow, that would be. It's quite the amount. So why don't you? I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm just going to get you to, if you wanted to set this up or just get into it. Ken, I saw him give a talk last year, and it was actually an event that Roberto put on, and that's when we first met. And so it really made sense that if we're going to have a Christmas message, that I'd go to Ken for this. So without further ado, Ken, please.
Well, thanks, Luke. I appreciate it. The talk this afternoon, I've titled it, "Stop Wondering Whether That's a Light, Just Get Out of the Tunnel." And I really want to connect with all of you as if we were in person. I want to deliver something that's really worth hearing but I don't want to stray too far from my notes. I don't want to get lost. So I ask your grace and patience, because I might stumble as I try to stick pretty close to my notes, to my script, so that I don't go wandering off somewhere down a rabbit hole. I want to extend as a beginning, as an opening, to all of you who are listening right now, the warmest greetings of the season. As this season continues to unfold in the midst of everything that's going on around us, may you nevertheless experience peace and love and health. Now, Luke asked me to deliver a message that would lift people out of the kind of the doldrums that we've perhaps slipped into, and the pain that maybe some of us have endured, maybe are still enduring as a result of the pandemic and all the other events that have happened this year. And so this message of hope will be delivered in two parts. The first part touches very lightly on the nature of hope itself. And the second, I am certain, is going to offer what I believe is a very real and powerful hope. So let's begin just trying to understand a little bit about the nature of hope. Of what does hope comprise and how does it work? That's a very broad, deep subject. And so I've decided that I'm just going to look at one aspect of it. We're going to begin by looking at the word itself. I'm fascinated by the way meanings and the use of words shift and change over time. Sometimes the change occurs because of novel usage, and sometimes the change occurs because of the way the society has changed its thinking. So here's an example of a word whose meaning has shifted over time through novel use: prevent. The vent portion of the verb prevent came from the Latin verb venio, to come. And the pre portion of the word means that it takes place ahead of the to come part. So at one time, the verb prevent was used to describe the activity of going ahead of somebody to make sure that everything was properly prepared before their arrival. It might have been used by someone in a position of authority like this: I sent my staff ahead of me to prevent my arrival. But at that time, it would mean that one's staff had been sent ahead to make all the relevant preparations for their arrival, so that when the boss arrived, everything would be properly in order and conveniently ready for them. But nowadays, if somebody used the sentence, I sent my staff ahead of me to prevent my arrival, it would suggest that for some bizarre reason, the boss sent their staff ahead of them to ensure that they never got there. And that is a shift in meaning. So let's look at the word hope. The general meaning of the word hope has not shifted much. As history has unfolded, it's meant much the same the whole time. But the thinking behind the use of the word has shifted considerably. So it's always meant the anticipation or the longing for something that's desired but not yet realized. And that part of it hasn't changed, but the mechanics of hope have shifted significantly as time has unfolded. As far as the mechanics of hope went, in the past, what mattered most was not the nature of what was hoped for, but from whom or from whence the hope was expected to be fulfilled. What was being hoped for might have been wildly unlikely, but if the agency by which it was expected to be granted was powerful and trustworthy, like God, well, that was all that mattered, especially if that agency had promised to fulfill the hope. Now, Western society gradually lost its trust in recognized agencies of a transcendent nature. As Barna's surveys and studies have shown, most people who claim a belief in God are not actually practicing canonical versions of Judaism, Christianity, or other theistic faiths. Rather, since the late 80s when Barna started his studies, and all through the 90s when he continued them, what he documented was that their belief in God arose from a series of spiritual propositions that are known technically as deism. Most people are not consciously deists, though, but that's what it is. They are engaged in the belief of a distant God who doesn't any longer really have an impact on their personal lives. To the extent that God does have an impact on their personal lives, the God with which they are engaged in their own folk religion is a God whose character is usually simply a better and more virtuous reflection of themselves. In other words, God shares most of their opinions. They've unconsciously created a God in their own best image, and God serves to offer them security, hope, and reassurance, usually without making inconvenient demands. And he serves to take the blame when things go drastically wrong. As this shift in society's thinking occurred, the word hope came less and less from a faith-connected disposition and became more of a quick, banal sentiment, an expression of goodwill or kindly regard, as in, hey, I hope that works out for you. And now that we've reached the stage that we are in our society at this point, hope can refer to any dream, long shot, or desire, and can now be used almost synonymously with desire, expectation, or anticipation. And whereas in the past, what mattered was not the nature of the hope or the quality of the person who held the hope, but the nature and quality of whom the guarantor of the hope was, nowadays what matters is the nature of the hope relative to the quality or merits of the one holding the hope. Our focus is no longer on God. Rather, it's on humanity and our evaluation of the likelihood of the hope. For instance, a father may say, my daughter hopes that one day she will be a Premier League goaltender. Now, be advised for the purposes of this example that the child was the victim of an accident that left her blind in one eye and with an attenuated left arm. The reasonable chances of her becoming a Premier League goalie are vanishingly small. At one time in history, someone might have explained that for all she may desire to be a Premier League goaltender, it is unlikely that God would grant such a wish, particularly as it is not a hope supported by canonical scripture, and that the father would be wiser and the daughter better served if their hope were more appropriately channeled. But then, as history advanced and the deist position became popular, one would probably have expressed themselves this way. Well, the universe is a wondrous place. It's able to produce astonishing things. I'll hope with her, perhaps send some positive thoughts and energy in her direction, and possibly the universe will do something amazing. After all, anything is possible and miracles do occur. A hope articulated in such a manner is more focused on the astonishing possibilities of a wondrous universe and the recorded exceptionalities in human history than on any aspect of a canonically recognized, transcendent, immanent being known as God. And in today's society, hope has become a sentiment managed with an eye to political correctness. Nobody who desires to be socially sensitive would say anything too bluntly that would dash that child's hopes. We wouldn't want to be cruel to the child, nor would we want to risk disparaging anyone's belief system. So we generally respond with a rather naive Pollyanna style of political correctness, with a shallow though well-meant optimism. We're likely to offer something akin to, hey, good for her, what a dream. I hope that works out for all of you. None of us wants to be the one who tells either her or her father that a one-eyed, short-armed person is an unlikely candidate for a Premier League goalie. Society's concept of hope has morphed, and our use of the word has been recast because our society's beliefs and thinking have altered. So what kind of hope should I offer you today? Here's a spoiler. I'm a little old-fashioned. And surely you are not interested in the largely unsupported hope that is announced as an almost greeting card-like sentiment of goodwill and kindly intentions. I think we all see through those well-meant but ultimately powerless expressions of warm sentiment called hope. I won't offer that today. And aside from the well-meant but ultimately empty hope of mere sentiment, the other kind of hope I want to avoid is any kind of false hope. I think we need to discuss false hope briefly, because there's been rather a lot of that in recent history. Most false hope is founded on hype, not on solid reasoning. I think you may know the kind of hype I mean. We've heard a lot of it in our society, especially recently. It could be financial hype. It could be religious hype. It could be political hype. And sometimes they manage to combine elements of all three of those kinds of hype in a single brand of super hype. Hype seeks to elicit an active response by contriving to grab people emotionally in a manner that bypasses the critical faculties of analytical reason. It is almost invariably founded on a historically unsubstantiated narrative or a quirky interpretation of an established one. It usually involves questionable logic, promotes dreams that are usually too good to be true or unlikely to be true. Yet the veracity of the hype is often contradicted by close observation of the key characters pitching it. It should be recognized as false, given the background information and context of which we could and should be aware, and yet clearly many fall prey to these false hopes. It's amazing that so many people are fully persuaded by such a shallow technique, but many studies prove that hype works, which is why it's so often used. And recently, as a technique, we're once again seeing hype disparaging informed reason. It has been 2 generations since informed reason has been so vilified as it has been recently. You have to go back to the Stalinist era, when educated and informed citizens were popular targets for state-sponsored witch hunts. No, hope derived from any kind of hype acts on the mind and the heart, the way simple sugar operates on the body. I think you know what I mean. When one is hungry, one can wolf down a handful of chocolate, and the energy it provides can keep you going for a while. But then you experience the sugar crash, and you're left in worse shape than before you ate that delicious chocolate. False hope is like sugar. It tastes great and feels good for the moment, but it's rather unhealthy as a steady diet. When mixed with politics, hype-based hope can cause lasting damage of the kind that has been well documented in the writings of Voltaire, Dostoevsky, Frankl, and Solzhenitsyn. And without realizing it, many people feed themselves on a steady diet of hype, sentimentality, and misinformed ideology. It's most prevalent in religion and politics, but it is also found readily in economics and finances. And one of my concerns, and the reason I'm taking time to address this matter, is that I think our world has become extremely vulnerable to this heady cocktail. I think our society has become addicted to hype-based hope. And I believe it is chiefly because we have turned away from our historic spiritual orthodoxy. In terms of our psycho-emotional and spiritual health, it's like trying to live on a diet of potato chips, Coke, and chocolate. It may keep the hunger pangs away, but it's gradually killing us. False hope of all kinds. And it's false because it's not based on truth. In the year 2000, a little-known sociology scholar by the name of Os Guinness wrote a book called Time for Truth. He's a high-level scholar who at one point worked for an influential conservative think tank in the US. He left that position to write his book. His book was prophetic. It's a thin, very readable book. You should look it up. If you read it, you'll wonder if, in 1999, as he wrote it, he was reading newspapers from 20 years in the future. Yeah. A valid observation with respect to our time is that with the exception of historians and investigative journalists, ideological hopes and the hype that fuel them are not usually well investigated and not well documented. Consequently, few realize that they are not supported either by facts or by a long history of validation. And yet, they increasingly appeal to the common masses who are moved by emotion more than by reason. Anthropologists, historians, journalists, sociologists, and psychologists have uncovered and examined incidents of strange cults and religious sects, financial schemes, and political ideologies, some of which have lasted for multiple generations, and the damage these false hopes have created. In some instances, their purpose was to offer hope in dark times. In other instances, it was simply to get rich or to gain power. But in each instance, the main ingredient in common was a false hope promoted by a variety of hype that appealed to and then entangled people whose prior, more appropriately established sources of hope were no longer proving adequate to the stresses that they were experiencing. False hope causes damage way beyond the individual level. The twisted narrative, the distorted truth and outright lies, the flawed logic, the corruption of justice, the abuse of law, often accompanied by a message that promotes and justifies violence, all contribute to make the consequences of false hope totally devastating. The curse of a false hope is incredibly far-reaching. Here are some historical examples. In the religious category, the cargo cults that were uncovered in the 1940s and 50s, the Mason family, the People's Temple, the Branch Davidians, and Heaven's Gate, as well as American-style evangelicalism and prosperity gospel churches all around the world. In the political category, the revolutions of the 18th century, fascism of the 1920s through to the 40s, Stalinism of the 1920s through to the 50s, Maoism of the 1940s through to the 60s, Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge of the last half of the 1970s, more recently, ISIS and the Taliban, not to mention several current governments around the world. In the financial category, Bernie Madoff, Enron, and the global economic crisis of 2008. They were all the result of false hopes, the details of some of which were deliberately covered up. These false hopes and the ideologies behind them, many of which were delusional, were not challenged by the people who most needed to challenge them. They spawned cults and sects and cabals and conspiracies and chaos of all kinds, whether financial, religious, or political, and sometimes all three. The followers of these false hopes became followers precisely because people's need for hope is so great that it seems as if we are afraid to examine the source of our hope, lest we discover a flaw or a reason not to hope. And once we are well into the tunnel of the false hope, it is often too late, even if we begin to suspect that something is wrong. Humanity often seems to operate on the logic that a false hope is better than no hope, the way many people seem to operate on the logic that a dysfunctional love is better than no love. We are terribly vulnerable to many kinds of false narratives and false hopes. It's the promise of light at the end of the tunnel that keeps us going, even when that light is merely a lure, drawing us ever deeper into the darkness of the tunnel. Without consciously recognizing it, people can become so desperate for the hope on offer that they turn a willfully blind eye to the improbable narrative and the other logically flawed and questionable components on which the false hope has been founded. Often, people are not individually equipped to examine all those components properly themselves. For various reasons, they choose not to listen to those who are better qualified and better able to do so, either because they are so desperate for the hope on offer that they don't want to look too closely, or because part of the clever narrative is that nobody else, especially not those people, can be trusted. In the midst of the darkness of the tunnel, the flicker of any light is mighty attractive. Valid hope and real meaning are essential to a balanced, stable, psycho-emotional life. And that is true both for the individual and the community, especially at the national level. Viktor Frankl articulated that truth poignantly with respect to the individual level in his short but powerful book, Man's Search for Meaning, published after his release from the Nazi death camps of World War II. A life devoid of meaning and hope is one filled with despair, and such a life becomes ever more untenable. With reference to the communal level, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book Gulag Archipelago documented in nauseating detail the crumbling of a modern nation as its people were drawn ever deeper into the darkness, despair, and hopelessness of Stalin's communism, all the while telling themselves that sooner or later the flickering light they were following would prove to be a glorious beacon. And later, The reason so many ex-Soviet nations fell back into one form of administrative dysfunctionalism or another, despite all the hope the citizens held, was that after communism, the truths that are supposed to uphold the dynamics of governance and management were so devastated that the people did not have the collective means to guide their society back to a place of broad economic stability and sustainable democracy. So if a valid, meaningful hope and truth are so essential, and false hope and lies are so dangerous, how do we ensure that our hope is not a false one that will ultimately disappoint and probably undermine or weaken us, possibly even destroy us? How do we recognize truth? And how do we recognize a valid, meaningful hope? I'll address those questions in the second part of this message.
All right. Well, thank you, Ken. We're going to take some questions now if anyone have them. I've got 3 or 4, which is never a problem for me, but I'm just going to prime the pump, and I just want to ask one question. Well, one of my questions here, and then I know hopefully other people will join in. You mentioned Viktor Frankl a few times in this, and for an individual to be a survivor of a concentration camp and to see the world turn into the very ugly place it did. Did Viktor Frankl have hope, or did he have something else? Was it faith? What gave him the ability to choose not to hate? Because that's, if I'm not mistaken, that man's search for meaning, or man's search for purpose. Drawing a blank here. He made a choice. He said, the only thing I have left is my ability to choose to hate, and I'm not going to do that. Any idea where that came from?
Yeah, he was pretty honest about a lot of the things that he went through. And he experienced anger and outrage and shock and horror and grief. The hopes to which he clung, tragically, the dearest one to him was the hope that he and his wife would get back together. And at the end of the war, he found out that she had been killed, and that was really devastating. But the hope that he clung to, the hope that he said that makes the difference, is that every act that you take has meaning and purpose, and therefore it is worth making the choice to perform those acts. And the acts that he said were most powerful were the acts of compassion and kindness, and the acts of care for the other inmates, that they would look after each other. And he said those made the difference. When somebody just went off and sort of started to hunker down inside themselves and not involve themselves anymore in those acts of kindness and compassion, when they started to give up and say it's meaningless, it's pointless, I'm trying to save this man's life and I know he's going to die. Why would I give him a piece of my bread? I've only got one little piece of bread and I need it. Why would I share it with him? When people started to think that way, that was the first step towards their inevitable death. And he cataloged the death of people, many people, many people, as they gradually became more and more self-absorbed and more focused on their own survival. The ones who survived and who managed to come out with their sanity intact were the ones who were engaged in acts of altruism and generosity and kindness and compassion, and sometimes even towards their own guards.
So it would seem that there's a direct correlation between something to move towards as opposed to it's all just messed up. Like it's something out of themselves, something that they, despite their circumstances, that they were going to, support their fellow inmates. They're going to have compassion for them. They're going to do that. Gave them something to do, or gave them something to kind of aspire to, as opposed to, the spiral of despair going on that.
Yeah, and particularly the belief that no matter how small or how seemingly ineffective what you are doing might be, the fact that you are choosing to take that action with that kind of altruistic compassion in your heart is itself meaningful and is itself effective in preserving your sanity and your life as well, hopefully, as the person to whom you are reaching out.
Right. Very cool. Thank you for that explanation. Other people, are there other questions right now? Because I have a couple more and I'm going to ask them, but I wonder if I see a couple of heads shaking, nothing like that. Let me put it on. It's up to you to unmute yourself. So, okay, well, going once, going twice.
Yes.
Okay, Ned. Oh, thank you, Chris.
So I actually went to visit Auschwitz about 5 years ago, and they had the Viktor Frankl book. I started reading, and fortunately, I haven't had a chance to finish reading through it yet. But when I started reading the book, what motivated Viktor Frankl he could have left, is my understanding of the book, and what motivated Viktor Frankl to stay and make sure stay with his parents is that I think there was a table that came from one of the one of the arks of the synagogue, and it had in Hebrew the part of the commandments to honor thy mother and father.
Huh.
That's what I recall from the book.
Yeah, Chris, you're right in remembering that he did have an opportunity to get out of the country before the arrest, and you're right that his concern for his parents was certainly one of the primary reasons for staying in spite of the risks, and he was also concerned about who was going to care for some of the people who were in the hospital. He had heard rumors that the patients in the various psychiatric hospitals were being gathered up and dealt with, and he was concerned. He didn't want to abandon either his parents or his patients.
So certainly had a higher calling to do stuff on that.
A tremendous sense of personal integrity as well.
Sounds that way. So I just want to touch back quickly on the idea that basically abdicating responsibility for false hope. And since we're talking about World War II and specifically the Germans and whatnot, it was interesting because I'm often curious as to how someone can come into power, the Hitlers of the world. How can they come into power? And as I've said to my children who are on this call, which I feel extremely blessed that they're taking time this afternoon to be here with me, and I just lost my train of thought. Oh man, I'm sorry. I just went.
How did these guys get into the position?
Yeah, how they get? Thank you on that. I'm so touched by my kids being here. I lost my thought. So the Third Reich came into power because there was the political will of the people. And I think that what they had is there was a false promise that something was going to be better because they were disenfranchised. This is my understanding of history. And certainly my 16-year-old son would probably correct me on that because he would know more about that. But that seemed to be why they were able to kind of go forward, because there's this idea that, life is terrible and it's going to, and we're going to blame everyone else for that type of stuff, right? So that seems to be the most glaring example of basically abdicating responsibility for this sense of hope and at all costs. Would you agree with that, or do you see that slightly different?
One of the most interesting studies on how these guys came to power, and even more importantly, how they were kept in power, is available by Jordan B. Peterson in one of his many, many, many broadcasts. Jordan B. Peterson is a Canadian clinical psychologist who's only recently gathered a lot of other attention because of recent events in his life and in the life of Canada, Bill C-120, and so on. But his point was, and he took his lead from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, And Alexander Solzhenitsyn said the only reason why the Stalin and all of his cronies were able to stay in power as long as they did was that each individual person sold out to a lie. That out of fear and out of a sense of lack of responsibility, they sold out. And he said that this was particularly also the case, as he's documented, in Germany, that the people sold out one by one individually. And he said it was because they didn't understand that every individual matters, that every individual vote counts. Some of them just washed their hands of it and stopped participating in any aspect of the government. Others sort of put their hands over their ears and just went forward looking after themselves. But he said it was because the populace gave up. That's what kept the people like Stalin and Hitler in power. And that's, I haven't done my own research on that, apart from reading Solzhenitsyn and Frankl and a good many historians. That's a hypothesis that's coming from an area where my own expertise is only modest, but it rings true. It rings true because I don't think any government can absolutely withstand the will of the people. And the Hungarians in 1956 almost proved that. Except
the Russians.
We let them down. We promised them that we would be there, and we let them down, the West. But what the Hungarians managed to do with nothing in 1956 shows that what Peterson's hypothesis is valid. And another example, what year was it? Someone help me, 1970 in Czechoslovakia? Same thing. And they almost made it. And then the West abandoned them, and the Soviet tanks rolled in. So, if the people believed in themselves, I'm not sure things would have gone the way they went.
Thank you. Any other questions before Ken launches into this second very learned talk that I'm enjoying thoroughly?
Don't call it that.
It's okay. Okay, so
this is probably a little bit off topic, or just to go off on a tangent. But the thing I always say about the way the Nazis have taken power is that it was actually a minority that voted for Hitler in the first place.
Right.
And it really and it's sad that people say, hey, the Germans elected they elected Hitler, the Germans elected Hitler. Well, actually, no. The majority, the majority of the Germans didn't even vote for Hitler. And once he took power, it's sad. It is very sad that the atrocities happened, and the Germans knew bad stuff was happening. They may not have known exactly how, but they knew that Jews are being thrown into these camps with not enough food and smoke coming out of the chimneys, and
they chose to ignore it.
Well, they did choose to ignore it, but there was what could they do anyway once the Nazis were in power? I mean, yeah, they could tell people, but what could they?
Well, I think Viktor Frankl's answer to that is you cannot take away my choice to decide for myself how I will act. Certainly there will be consequences. But even if the consequence is that I'm put against a wall and shot, I'd rather that for the right reason than continue living for the wrong reason. Or if my consequence is that I end up as he did in a concentration camp. Each step of the way, he said, the decision is mine and the responsibility is mine. And one of the things that Jordan B. Peterson said in one of the lectures that he gave in a few years ago, 2017, I think, is that we must understand we are individually responsible. He said, if you ask me who is responsible for what goes on in Ottawa, because he's a Canadian, or what goes on in Washington if I was an American, he said, it comes down to me. And he said, if we wash our hands of the reality of that, we've already taken the first step in being just like the Germans or just like the Russians.
Yeah, where does it start? Where's the slippery slope? Okay, so Ken, I'm going to get you to continue with your second half and of your talk.
Thank you, Luke. I'm honored.
Yeah.
So how do we recognize truth? How do we recognize a valid, meaningful hope? I've already begun to respond to that. Meaningful hope must be grounded in truth. So let me say a few simple words about truth. Truth is another one of those huge concepts, and I'm not going to even scratch the surface of it very deeply. But let's look at a few things about truth, and I want you to hang on to these. Truth is what's left after everything else has been either burned off or rendered clean by some process of purification by elimination, which is why truth is regarded as so precious. It takes time, hard work, and sacrifice to discover the truth. It seldom arrives as a gift wrapped with a bow. Consequently, there are a lot more lies than truth in circulation out there. Pure, unalloyed truth is rare. But truth is much more powerful than lies. 10 elaborate lies or more can be vanquished by a single, simple truth. Solzhenitsyn proved this. His book, Gulag Archipelago, is credited by most scholars as bringing down Soviet communism. A half-truth, or a distorted one, is as bad, sometimes worse, than a complete lie. And political and religious ideologies are full of such destructive half-truths and distorted truths. Half-truths and distorted ones make healthy governance and good politics and wise choices extremely difficult, if not impossible. All real, pure truth belongs to God. All truth belongs to God. If something is really true, then God is connected to that truth in some way. And therefore, no person of faith needs to fear any truth, as if that truth might in some way undermine their faith. Any faith, small f, or faith, capital F, that has a reason to fear truth is a false faith. No person of faith should fear science as if science and faith are mutually exclusive. They're not. As the scriptures, the Christian scriptures affirm, God is truth. This is not the same as saying that truth is God, for God is much more than truth, in the same way that he's much more than love, much more than justice, much more than righteousness. But all truth is of God. As surely as gravity is one of the essential forces associated with the theory of relativity, if something is true, then God is connected to it as the earth is connected to the sun. It is an essential corollary, therefore, particularly in Christian teaching, that all lies are in some way serving and connected to the devil, the tester, the accuser, Satan. As Jesus said, the devil is a liar, and he's the father of all lies. So with all my heart, after much study and thought, I believe that the first and most important element of meaningful hope is truth. But let's never forget, there are more than one path to truth. So let's now look at the paths that people can take to find truth. First, there's the much lamented empirical scientific path to truth. I say much lamented because lately, the pernicious, and I would even say criminal acts of tobacco companies, big oil, certain governments, and other vested interests have deliberately undermined the security, and I would even say virtue, of properly peer-reviewed empirical science, to the point that, for instance, the medical community and courts for a time were paralyzed as to the appropriate way to respond to the threat of tobacco. And national governments to this day remain uncertain as how to handle climate change and the urgent need for alternative fuels, even though, for instance, Margaret Thatcher discussed how urgently that had to be addressed way back in the 1980s. And the trust in vaccines has been so undermined that in several nations, more than 15% of the population will neither receive vaccines nor allow them to be administered to their children, and a further 10 to 15% express uncertainty and distrust. Notwithstanding that, I think that peer-reviewed empirical science offers a kind of gold standard as a solid, reliable source of truth. After empirical science comes the detailed studies and carefully peer-reviewed truths uncovered by the so-called soft sciences, like psychology, anthropology, history, cartography, and other such classic disciplines. However, recently in the halls of academia, there have emerged so many agenda-driven subsets of the classic soft sciences that I believe the value of that path to truth and people's trust in it has been severely damaged. And I'm afraid I blame ego-driven and agenda-oriented academia and all the sophistry that arises from that for that problem, but this isn't the forum to argue that. Next, there is the less scientific, yet just as secure path known as long historical experience. Accumulated lifetimes of experience is a proven path to valuable truths, and over time, such truths become enculturated. In ancient days, these truths were codified and embedded in stories and songs to make them easier to pass on. Truths like how to find water in an arid region, where you're likely to find game in a harsh season, how to navigate a trackless region like over ice or over the ocean or a desert, how best to cure skins with which to sew reliable footwear and durable clothes, how to safely cook certain foods, how to make nutritious meals, what plants are deadly, how to build reliable shelters and serviceable boats, how to trap, tame, and herd animals, how to plant, grow, and harvest valuable crops, and which crops are best suited to which specific regions. Or the triumph of noble virtues and ethical behavior over dishonesty and deceitfulness, and much more of that kind of knowledge were all discovered by means of long human experience. Jordan B. Peterson, whom I mentioned earlier, a clinical psychologist, has some interesting lectures and podcasts that you'll readily find out there, basing the importance of archetypes that have emerged from the laboratory of long-standing human experience. And he offers a few kind of amusing cautionary tales about what happens when we ignore, distort, or attempt to revise those ancient truths. And among the well-established truths that have emerged from long-standing human experience, I would include certain spiritual teachings, long codified in various sacred scriptures of both the written and the oral variety. Now, I'll return to this later. I want to continue at the pathways. Let's continue on the pathways to truth. And I think we can't leave out, we must finish with the arts. The arts are as much a form of experienced and transmitted knowledge as any others I've just pointed to. And I would argue that elements of the artistic must be included for the preservation of all the other paths. The arts include storytelling, drama, music, dance, literature, martial skills, navigational skills, tracking, hunting, fishing skills, and graphic illustration of all variety. Solid, reliable, and uplifting truth has been found through each of these paths to knowledge. Now, many different kinds of knowledge and skill are needed to navigate our journey through life in a manner that is maximally fulfilling. Most people acquire the bulk of the knowledge they use and the skills that they employ unconsciously. We are a learning and adapting organism, and we're always learning and adapting unconsciously. We form habits, patterns, beliefs, views, opinions, and preferences, all in a manner that is largely unconscious. Certain skills and certain kinds of knowledge require a more deliberate focus, but the bulk of our regularly applied knowledge is learned unconsciously. The amount of skill and knowledge we require simply to survive as an individual within a culture is enormous. It is foolish in the extreme to deny or disparage any of these paths to knowledge and skill, including the spiritual paths and religious knowledge. And especially, I would say, the deep multidisciplinary scholarship of Orthodox Judeo-Christian theology. Opportunities for meaningful hope grow and develop as we appropriately apply all these paths to knowledge. How do we appropriately apply the paths of knowledge? Well, first we need to understand which path will take us to the knowledge that will be relevant on which we should base our hope. So, for instance, in the desire to develop a vaccine against COVID before year's end, we applied empirical science. And we combined it with our growing experience in the use and efficacy of vaccines. And if we were people of faith, we may have also been holding in prayer all those who were working on these vaccines. And I think we've all been encouraged to know that 2 of those efforts have recently produced useful vaccines, and still more are in progress. The achievement of a vaccine came as a result of those appropriate paths to truth and the hope contained in them. But sadly, there was also a lot of spurious hype surrounding that project, which illustrates the constant need to understand where and how to look for real hope. It is not ultimately beneficial, ever, to look for hope in hype or other unsuitable places. What I'm saying is that hopes are real and powerful when they are based on truth and linked to their relevant pathways of knowledge. Sadly, false hopes are also powerful, but deadly, precisely because they are not based or verifiably linked to the pathways of knowledge. Now, for the sake of an important example, I want to turn for a moment to the world-famous practice of criminal profiling. Criminal profiling was first developed by an inquisitive FBI agent named John E. Douglas. In the late 1970s, Mr. Douglas used techniques and knowledge gleaned from psychology, anthropology, sociology, history, and the arts of human tracking to develop what is now acknowledged as one of the most powerful tools in tracking, capturing, and prosecuting serial criminals. The art/science of criminal profiling was not immediately accepted by the police forces or the justice system. What led to the acceptance of this new forensic approach was the outstanding, indeed uncanny, success rate in capturing and successfully prosecuting serial criminals who were caught using the method that Douglas developed. Now, my point is that if success at forensic and judicial endeavors lent credibility and acceptability to criminal profiling, then by the same logic, the long history of success at bringing personal redemption, renewal, new life, inner strength and clarity, new direction, purpose, new and meaningful hope to struggling individuals ought to lend credibility to the Christian faith and to other long-standing theistic faiths and spiritual philosophies. Now, this is not the forum to pursue further into this point, but I ask you to consider that the ancient religions, the Christian faith in particular, have undergone more scholarly investigation and faced more challenges and tests of various kinds of a more intense nature than people ordinarily realize. And my concern is that as a path to understanding and hope, the Christian faith has lost ground recently to distorted interpretations of the faith, to disparagement of the faith, to syncretistic blends and unhealthy ideologies and hype of all kinds. And as I say this, I want to stress that I hold the Christian faith very much apart from Christian institutions. There's no question that every Christian institution is flawed. That's the result of human brokenness and human failings. It's not a flaw of the faith, it's a flaw of humanity. And I don't know any faith tradition whose institutions have been so marred by betrayals of trust and human depravity as the Christian institutions have been. That's not to ignore the appalling problems and terrible violence that have arisen from institutions associated with other faiths. I simply want to acknowledge as a Christian that the institutions of Christianity have failed miserably at living out the whole of the faith that was entrusted to them. Yet, the simple, humble practice of the authentic Christian faith has brought tremendous blessing to countless people over 2 millennia, whatever their estate in life. And it is from the deep teaching of the Christian faith that the hope that I now brings to you comes. And when I speak of the simple, humble practice of the faith, I'm not referring to the rituals of any of the institutions, though they can and should play a very beneficial role. No, I'm referring to the steady, quiet development of an individual and communal relationship with God by learning of the ways of Jesus and the Holy Spirit through regular study of the scriptures and the maintenance of a life of simple prayer and the determined but not legalistic practice of the virtues and attitudes promoted by the actions and teachings of Jesus. After 50 years of practicing my faith, I'm convinced that the habit of trying to see other people and the events of life and all my circumstances and myself through the eyes of Jesus, and by practicing the virtues and attitudes demonstrated by him, has brought my life into a context and perspective that differs considerably and delightfully from the ordinary popular social narratives. As one humbly engages in any of the great spiritual traditions, and especially as one humbly engages and practices the Christian faith, one gradually learns how to sweep aside sophistry and hype, how to know the difference between real scholarship and shallow academia, how to be able to see through the vested interests of the world to the real qualities of those genuinely seeking the truth with you, to look beyond those who merely serve an institution for their own ends to those who are willingly, even eagerly, making great personal sacrifices in the service of a much greater cause. And one learns how to forgive, how to be meaningfully compassionate, how to be honest about one's own shortcomings, one's own failures and personal brokenness. One learns about loving oneself in a healthy way, so that one stands on a better foundation for loving others appropriately. And one learns a great deal about hope. And with respect to all this, I am, I confess, a rather slow learner. Nevertheless, it is from this perspective that I offer you this powerful message of hope as this year comes to an end and next year begins. I believe that although the universe is a place of great mystery and incredible challenge, it is a more tolerant and even loving place than many of us have thought. I believe that the creator of the universe, a being of greater mystery, complexity, and wisdom than we can fathom, has chosen to reveal him, her, or itself in a variety of ways, so that we may have the benefit of the spiritual insights that come of it and the possibility of a relationship with this divine being. And I believe that this divine being's greatest act of self-revelation and the greatest fulfillment of his remedial and redemptive purposes is through the person of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the historical Jesus. And I believe that with this purpose in mind, God chooses to work in us and through us, despite our brokenness and our many limitations. And I believe that he assists us in all this through his Spirit. I believe that God understands and works with our tendency to anthropomorphize and teaches us that we are created in his image, not principally to give us a glimpse into his nature, but chiefly to teach us that we are to aspire to and attempt to emulate his qualities, especially those of love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, grace, forbearance, selflessness, and sacrifice for a higher cause and a greater good. I believe that he has shown us that real, lasting power to make change comes relationally, through the application of these ways, not through the exercise of might or the power of any fleshly or worldly kind, including not through laws, whether divine or human in origin. I believe, notwithstanding any of our human limitations, that he has called each of us, every single person on the planet, to a vocation of service for his glory and for the good of others. We can serve him and benefit others, finding our own fulfillment in the process by holding to his values and his way in every sphere of human endeavor and activity. A mom and or a dad loving their child through every stage of life, every up and down, every trial and triumph, every failure, and every renewed attempt is one of the finest examples of this call to service that I could offer. I believe that parents who fulfill this call are a micro model of what our whole society should be like. I believe that combat soldiers and officers of the law are called to model themselves this way too. I believe that teachers and doctors and servants of the justice system and all who have been elected or appointed to positions of management or governance, whether in business or in government, are called to fulfill their careers by living out this universal calling. Through Jesus, God has shown us the lasting effectiveness that this calling can have, this calling to serve in his way. I believe that this calling is an enormous challenge because of our collective and individual brokenness. Therefore, we need help. I believe that God offers this assistance through his Holy Spirit. I believe, and history has shown, that the Spirit is there to sustain and support any person of any ethnicity, any creed or philosophy who truly seeks to live out this calling, to live out the virtues, values, attitudes, and perspectives that were historically modeled by Jesus. But more particularly, I believe that the fullest experience of the presence, work, and power of the Holy Spirit comes to those who recognize Jesus for who he is and who honor him for what he has done. Given the assistance and support of God through his Spirit, I believe that I and every one of you may overcome any loss we may have sustained, and that you can overcome any failure you may have experienced, no matter what the reason for that loss or failure may have been. I believe that I and any of you who wish to join me can become a better person today than I was yesterday, and a better person tomorrow than I was today. It costs nothing other than some minor effort and presence of mind to be more responsible, a little more loving, a little more patient, a little more compassionate, a little more forbearing, a little more willing to listen, to put a greater effort into understanding, to be a little more accepting. And in all of this, the Holy Spirit will be there to help if we seek him, if we let him. It costs nothing other than a bit of pride and self-righteousness to be less judgmental, less assumptive, less condemning, less inclined to fall prey to salacious gossip and rumor mongering, less easily entangled in conspiracy theory and manipulative narrative, and to be less of a victim and more self-responsible. And in all these efforts too, the Holy Spirit is there to uphold us. I believe that each person who chooses to fully engage in this high calling will become an agent of change for the good of our broken and hurting world. I could tell you so many stories about how communities, families, and entire regions have been changed in this way. I believe that each person who engages in this high calling will themselves become more fully human experiencing a meaningful and purposeful life, becoming tiny mirrors of the shining virtues, values, and principles of God. I'd like to end with this quick story. As a teenager, I participated in a guided tour of a well-known cave. A diesel-powered generator a short distance from the cave's entrance provided electricity for lights throughout the portions of the cave that were open to the public, and for sump pumps to deal with small amounts of water that seeped in during spring melt and after heavy rains. It was a typical tourist type of cave experience, and I won't bore you with the details, but there's a highlight I want to share. It was when we were led to a large gallery, dimly lit by lights all around its perimeter. The gallery was so huge that all 60 of us on the tour were lost in its enormity. In the gallery, the tour guides handed 2 safety candles and 2 round, slightly concave clip-on mirrors to each of us. They said they were going to shut off the lights to allow us an experience that would change our lives. We were instructed to stand still when the lights were switched off and to await further instructions. I'm sure you know what's coming. We were all standing in a circle along the pathway at the bottom of this large gallery. One of the guides switched off the lights, and the darkness was unquestionably the darkest darkness any of us had ever experienced. Then another of the guides lit the first candle. It was a puny and ineffective light flickering in the dark vastness of the gallery. We couldn't even make out the guide's face. And then he lit the candle of a second guide. And then those 2 candles marked the location of the traveling guides as they proceeded to go around in opposite directions, lighting the 2 candles held by each of us on the tour. Slowly, the darkness was pushed back as the candles of all 60 of us were lit. And meanwhile, a 3rd and 4th pair of guides walked along, showing each person how to clip the mirrors to the safety candles. And as the mirrors were clipped in place, the light projected by each candle was effectively doubled. By the time each of us was holding our 2 mirrored safety candles above our heads, the cavern was even brighter than when the electrical bulbs had been switched on. Luke is right. We could all use a message of hope at this difficult time. As this year draws to a close and next year begins, I want to end with this thought. We don't need a spotlight of hype in the darkness of our times. We need each other. All of us together. Each of us being the best we can be with God's help and the Holy Spirit's work. Each of us just holding our little safety candle to add to the light. All of us together. Together, we can drive the darkness away as we each offer our little glow. Together, all of us. Together, we can light the way forward with the virtues and attitudes and actions Jesus has modeled. We can light the way forward with shared responsibility. Together, all of us, we can be amazingly bright and effective, facing the darkness together, each of us with our candle. And the darkness doesn't stand a chance. I said that in the darkness of a deep tunnel, people were susceptible to false hope, because in the darkness, any light is attractive. Jesus told his followers that he is the light of the world, and that anyone who follows him will never walk in darkness. It wasn't a promise that there would never be darkness. It was a promise that those who truly modeled their life after him and followed his ways would never be confused about which light is which. And they would know what to do to overcome the darkness.
Thank you, Ken, so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
You know, one of the things I say to people often, and I don't know where I got this from, but is this concept that we're all in it together. And that seems at times when you say, hey, we're all in this together. And it's just like that seems to drop people's It's like, or they feel kind
Yeah,
of
I hope that works out for you.
Yeah. So yeah, I just like that idea that, you know, if we have this ability to remember that we're really not alone. I know that one of the biggest problems of depression and suicide ideation is that isolation that people feel, and they feel like they're really so, and that thought of offing yourself is really a way out of the pain on that. And but there's that isolation is so strong and whatnot. I really like the first part of your talk where you made the analogy between candy and false hope. And what that kind of, what I think of with that is instant gratification, on how we have this need for that instant gratification, and how we reach for stuff because we're looking to fill whatever that is, what's going on. And you may be familiar with this study, Ken, and I had heard it. It's got to be 10 years old, and I hope it's not urban legend, but apparently the university decided to see what people would rather have, or what experience people rather have in a room by themselves, left alone with their thoughts, or getting a low-grade electrical shock. And the majority of the people picked the low-grade electrical shock as opposed to be alone with their thoughts. And it's very telling in regards to, you know, this constant looking out, constant being what's out there, what's dragging, what's happening, the fanaticism, or the extreme of stuff on that. And that seems to be like, you know, we don't want to look within, we don't want to be alone with ourselves, so we grasp externally to basically fulfill whatever is not there.
Yeah, I think that is a study that has been done. It's been replicated many
has
times.
it? Oh, good.
And the thing is that what you're saying is one of the challenges of our time, because we have so many sources of noise. And we've almost always got something on. As a pastor going and visiting people, I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to visit someone who's alone, a lonely, quote unquote, lonely person. And as I arrive, you know, the first thing they'll do is go and shut off the television. And they'll say to me almost apologetically, I only have it on because I need to have the noise.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I do. I'm not in any way disparaging that. I do understand what it can feel like. But what I'm saying is, I'm agreeing with you that we fill our world with noise because we don't want to listen inside. And I think that previous generations, before we had all this noise, before we had radio, television, then the internet, and before we could carry it around with us on, you know, in so many different ways, they had to learn to live with their own thoughts. And they had to learn to live with the sound of their own heartbeat. Even if they were busy working, they had to have our thoughts were there. Their thoughts were there. And they had no way of drowning them out. And I think our society has become a society that makes every way possible to drown them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And part of that drowning out, I think, you know, with social media specifically, and how there's if you haven't seen this movie, I strongly suggest the Social Dilemma, and it really talks about how social networks have figured out how to work on a reptilian part of our brain, and how to affect that, and the constant stimulus and those type of things. And so, you know, as we're shown more of what we want to see, even in my YouTube feed, because I am heavily embedded in YouTube with having like 4 channels or whatnot. And if I should happen to watch something that is, or even something comes through my feed, I'm going, oh, it's kind of interesting. All of a sudden I have a lot coming through my feed because it's constantly giving me, oh, he watched it for this time. The algorithm is going to say that is going to do that. So the interesting thing about the social network is the people that designed some of the things like the like and other things are very cognizant of the fact that this is working, and they themselves can't disengage from it.
Yeah.
One person actually said he had to write an algorithm for himself so he wouldn't be constantly doing this on his, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on how social media is just polarizing people and just making more solitude and more, or do you see it that way?
Good question. I'll answer, but if there's a way of involving other people on the channel here, I'd love to let them have a chance to share their thoughts and their insights
Absolutely.
as well. But just quickly, trying to be quickly. Buddy Guy wrote a song about me once, by the way. You all know Buddy Guy, the great blues artist.
Yeah. I know
Well,
Buddy.
he wrote a song about me. It's called "A Man of Many Words." So be careful.
Well,
Anyway.
we might have to compete on that.
Okay, so just quickly to your question, I think that social media has fooled us in many ways. One of the ways that social media fools us, it brings us into an unreal understanding of the world, because it is engineered in such a way, and so are we, that we chase likes. And the social media algorithms group people together according to the things that they say they like. And even Google's search parameters are shaped by the things that you say that you like. And because these companies are so entwined, what you've done on Facebook will very well show up on your Google search patterns.
Yeah.
So that you end up living more and more trapped in an echo chamber. Now, when you are trapped in that echo chamber, you are getting inundated with affirmation that leads you to think that you're right and gives you the false impression that your thinking is true. And so if you are a person who has one set of beliefs, you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by all kinds of other people on social media that have similar beliefs. And it'll feel like, oh, I'm part of the majority. I'm in with the in crowd, as the old song used to go. But if you have the exact opposite set of beliefs, you'll suddenly find that you've got your world all around you too. And you'll be feeling, hey, I'm in with the in crowd. I'm with the majority. And this feeds you a false understanding of the world. And if you think that you're in with the majority, and hey, the majority of people are already agreeing with me, why would I want to take time to listen to somebody that clearly can't be in the majority? Because if they were anything, that they'd be in with my group. And so we become so confused about what's real and what's true and what's valid. And we become so inundated with affirmation that we are unwilling to listen to people who disagree with us, and we don't know how to listen, we don't know how to be respectful, and we don't know how to honor what that other person brings. You know, I think we should all go back to having potluck suppers and learning how to eat what each other brings. And maybe if we were having more potluck suppers and learning how to eat what other people bring, we'd also be more able to listen to what other people are saying. And sure, this person might not do their beans the same way I do my beans, and they might not cook their or cut their salad or cook their chili the same way that I do mine, but I'd love to find out what they do. And I might discover it actually tastes pretty good. And maybe if I listen to what they say, I might find out that that's pretty cool too. And maybe some of my thoughts might actually be evolving and changing, and it would be a better world, I think. And I really wish that social media, which has got the capacity to do some really wonderful and good things, would stop feeding us this false sense of reality, just all for the sake of being able to sell advertisements.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I like the potluck analogy of that, you know, we end up eating the same thing. We think that's the only thing that there is to eat, and, you know, on that. I would like to open it. I'm going to open this up to others who want to make comments, and we got about 15 more minutes. I know people are busy. Some people have apologized for having to jump because stuff came up and on that, but questions, comments, thoughts. A lot of smart people in this room.
I would like maybe, if I may, quickly to address. Ken, thank you so much for the wonderful insights. Always very interesting. And by the way, for Ken to put that analogy about the chili, he makes a very good chili, I have to tell you guys. So that's good. Also want to offer an apology
All right
to all
there.
of you. Also want to offer an apology to all of you in the spirit of really having our intentions expressed. We had the intention to have live music today. I feel responsible for not having that today in the sense that I proposed that to look. But so you all know, unfortunately, the musicians, we didn't see eye to eye in the technicalities of getting them involved. And last minute, unfortunately, couldn't be part of it. Know that Luke has the good intention to do this in the spirit of lifting everybody up. And of course, I'm very grateful to have me here as a co-host, and also with Ken for providing those great insights and an open invitation to all of us. I just want to say that before the time runs out. I'm very appreciative of all of you and your time. And just wanna add to the social media aspect of it, based on what Ken was saying about taking on responsibility on that. I believe that if you are part of a platform that provides insights, or you with your opinion can influence others, I think that also that lands in our responsibility, our own responsibility to voice out what social media needs to be, and starting to do that, to produce that change in our own fields, in our own industries, with the people we interact with, whether it's family or friends. But we have the responsibility to start to shape that. We don't need to wait for the big people in these industries or in social media platforms to direct us as a society. We need to think outside the box and also lead the way and be faithful that we are leading that way to shaping that. And as history time and time again has proven, one person, everything starts with one person, for good or for bad. And if you have good intentions and you can lead the way and have other people involved and other people involved and other people involved, then you will produce that change. You will produce that rapid effect, that domino effect per se. And so I just want to leave that as an opinion to all of us, that it starts and ends with us. And we need to change that in social media. We need to make it social again and start the conversation and leading towards making these changes happen every day. So thank you for that.
I just had a quick question.
Yes, this is my wonderful niece, Taylor.
Hello.
Who's a school teacher.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what my question was related to. So I teach online right now due to COVID. And I was just kind of wondering, with this whole idea of the social media and the intention and all of that, what your thoughts on helping our children use those things effectively and understand those things and understand the processes that are behind them, because right now social media is a huge part of even their identities. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'd like to leave other people to have a chance. I don't think I'm the only person who has opinions and answers here. I'd love for other people to jump in and share their thoughts and insights on that question. It's a really good question. I mean, how do we help our young people learn how to navigate their way through everything that's out there and recognize what's high value and what's not?
Well, I got something to. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good, Sam.
Okay, good. I didn't know whether my mic was on or not. So, a couple of things, and then it'll lead to my question in response. Yeah, to me, teaching kids the skills of critical thinking are so essential. I know I went to a university, and to this day, one of the best courses I ever took was a course called experimental psychology, which was, many people regarded as kind of esoteric and pretty fluffy kind of stuff. And yet it taught me what's the difference between a properly done scientific study, and how do you tell what's bogus, and how do you analyze something that's presented to you to see whether it has the ring of truth to it or is done with a sense of bias. And so of all the dozens of courses I took over my university career, that's one of the ones I remember the best because it's one of the ones I use every day. So it's to me, it's the skills of critical thinking that can stand us in good stead no matter what the topic is that's presented to us. Which leads to my feedback or comment to you, Ken, is that one of the things that I see too is that, diving into the question of truth and what is truth, and so much of it depends on the perspective of the observer, and so much of it is relative. I know that there's a local author that's done quite well internationally, is from Edmonton, by the name of Timothy Caulfield. He's I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's in medicine. I think he's a joint appointment in medicine and law at the University of Alberta. And he really is very critical of those that just adhere to the latest fad or trend. He wrote a book called "Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything?" And he was critiquing her willingness to adhere to these anti-vaccination theories. And I've heard him speak, and he's so passionate about why aren't people more willing to listen to science, and science is where we should be going. And my answer to him, and so my question to you is, well, yeah, because science has proven itself to be wrong so many times that no wonder people have turned away from it and said, well, what the heck, I might as well listen to the latest theory that comes along. Scientists told us a few years ago DDT was the answer to our problems with vegetation. Scientists told us that plastic is the solution to everything we need in the world, and on the list goes. And so
cholesterol,
right.
Good cholesterol, bad cholesterol.
And there were people in the city of Edmonton who have parks named after them, who 100 years ago thought that eugenics was absolutely a scientific-based response to deal with some of the problems in the world. So, this idea that the truth is out there, and I just find that it's so tainted with what we have as the knowledge of the day, the perspective we come to. As they say, history is always written by the victors, and the losers of that in history have a completely different view of what had transpired. So, I really grapple with that whole concept at the end of the day of what really is the truth, and how do we get people. And secondly, the idea, this whole pandemic has raised that thing again with people, I won't ever take the vaccine because science can't be trusted. So it's become a real crisis in our society where science has lost its credibility just because of the nature of the beast. It is fraught with uncertainty. People are looking for certainty, and when they don't get it, then they just turn away completely and say, therefore, science has no value. Well, that's not quite the answer either. So,
Sean, you touched on a number of things very articulately, and I agree with a lot of what you said, which is not a way of now contradicting you. I agree with a lot of what you said. But I think what we need to do is teach people to be more comfortable with the complexities of life. I think that our education system, Taylor, I don't mean any offense to you, but I think that our education system teaches people to be lazy thinkers, and that needs to change. And so, Taylor, one of the first things that I would say to you, if you really want to help kids become better critical thinkers and move forward in the question of what's valid, what's real, and what's helpful, train yourself never to use the question, how do you feel? Or how does this make you feel? Because that's a sellout, it's a cop-out. It was deliberately brought in. I remember having arguments with the professors who teach Bachelor of Education courses at University of Ottawa, University of Toronto, University of McGill, and University, one of the other universities in Montreal, that we were all together in a panel. And they were saying that in order to break away from the nastiness of arguments in the classroom and leaving one kid feeling that maybe something they said was less valid than what another kid said, and nobody wanted to hurt anybody's feelings, that they were going to move away from the question, what do you think about this? And start adopting the question, how do you feel about this? And as long as we all we ever talk about is how we feel, then everybody's right and everybody's okay, because, well, that's how I feel. And that's garbage. I'm sorry. We are hurting ourselves. This is hurting our society. This is leading us in a bad direction. We need to get back to the whole art of critical analysis. Ask, what do you think about this? Why do you think that? Do you think that your thoughts are well-founded? Don't condemn the person for whatever thoughts they have, but invite them. Say, hey, but have you thought about this? But have you looked at that? Have you considered this? If we can get people to actually value thinking again, instead of only valuing feeling, we might actually get somewhere as a society. And coming back to what Sean was saying, I agree with you much of what you were saying, Sean, but we need to get people to be more comfortable with the complexity. The thing about truth is that there are very, very, very few absolute truths. I'm not sure that I'm absolutely certain about any absolute truths about anything. We need to stop thinking in terms of truth being an absolute truth and understand that we are all on a journey towards a better understanding of whatever it is we're looking at. And what we have is the best available truth for now. And be willing to accept that the possibility exists that something might be discovered later. Some other documents might turn up. Some other discovery might invalidate something that we thought was true. But at the time that we were thinking that, it was the best available data we had. And okay, we need to accept that. We need to say, hey, that was the best available data Monday, but now that it's Wednesday, we've got some new available data, and it's okay. And we don't condemn somebody because they were working with the best they had on Monday. We just say, it's Wednesday now. Let's move with what we're learning, and it's okay. Yeah, we just, we need to accept that things are growing, changing, evolving, shifting, and that none of the truth that we have now is complete. None of it. But it's the best we have now.
I think there's something that really that's got as an observer, as a Canadian observing the United States, because we do, there seems to be a real flavor of, if I see it differently, then therefore my value is totally gone. If I should happen to see it differently, if I happen to disagree or want to have, it's this polarization, either you're with me or against me, is what it feels like. And there's no middle ground of saying, let's just have a conversation.
Yeah, yes, that's very true, Luke. And I think that's a huge part of it. And that's where I come back to one of the greatest teachers, is also the Buddha, who, for him, it's all about attachment. And whatever truth we have today, if we become totally identified with it, and then that's the way we are, leaves no room for us to change tomorrow when new evidence comes along, because our identity is all tied up with that truth. That's where it comes, gets into trouble. Instead of losing our attachment, and I think, Ken, you would agree with this, our only attachment is to God or to Jesus or to truth, then we're not going to have our whole sense of well-being destroyed if some new evidence comes along and we have to change our what we're thinking. But
even that we need to hold lightly, Sean.
Yes,
yeah.
I do want to take issue though with your thing of asking people, how do you feel? To me, that's one of the great advances of the 20th century. My grandparents were very English and no one cared what anybody felt, right? Feelings never came into anything. And so I think we've maybe the pendulum's gone too far the other way. Because I find that you got to ask both questions. You ask,
Yes.
you think about this, and now tell me what you feel. And now, if they're incongruent, now let's explore where that incongruency comes from. Oh, it comes from the fact that you were told some story as a little kid that just doesn't hold water anymore. Well, now you can abandon feeling that way, right? But I think
that's a better articulation, Sean. Thank you.
yeah, it's really important to explore how we feel, because that's when we discover where maybe our thinking is flawed, or the stories we've been told have been flawed, or something, or we can at least we can explore it in a more holistic way what's going on.
No, that's articulated better. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Stan, right?
Stan, yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to correct you, by the way. I just want to be sure that I'm pronouncing well the name. But yeah.
My apologies, Stan.
No props. You have discovered the new truth, and now you're ready to go again.
That's the beauty about this, interacting and make it all natural. That's amazing. I just want to jump quickly to say how grateful I am for your participation as well. And again, the interaction between you and Ken is very, very interesting. I would say that I agree with your statement of feeling and thinking, because coming from a culture where there's so machismo, you are not allowed as well to feel. And also I will share a little bit of my personal feelings. Why I feel and think as this way is that I feel that and think that in North America, a lot of people are trapped by not expressing their feelings. And by expressing their feelings, you're doing something wrong as well. Just simply say, I love you. You trigger somebody already because you say, I love you, to not love you, or not to express it, or to close because of the traumas on the past, or because of the way that they grew up, and many, many, many things. And what I want to bring up to the table is the fact that we need to be more open to express our thoughts as express our feelings. And I think that is something that can move us towards a better society in general, to be honest. So thank you.
What I appreciated about what Stan was pointing to was the appropriate understanding of when we are thinking and when we are feeling. I don't think I can think hurt, but I can feel hurt. But I don't think I can feel logic, but I can think logic. And I do understand and appreciate the place that the gut plays in intuiting our way forward. But after we have intuitively moved forward, we do need to check it. So I really appreciate Stan's clarification. I think what we need to learn how to do is to use the right tool at the right time for the right reason. Any carpenter knows that you can make a heck of a mess if you use the wrong tool at the wrong time.
So on that note, we're a bit after our 2 hours in. I'm going to, I think I'm going to wrap this up and bring this to a close. And before I end it, I just want to give you my favorite quote. I'm not sure who said it, but Taylor, this is for if my niece. Yeah. Anyway, it's this idea of we don't want to teach people what to think. We want to teach them how to think. And that's where I think and the fact that conflict is not a bad thing. And conflict is not something to be afraid of. Conflict is part of life on that. So I would like to thank greatly Ken for you taking your time out to write this talk, and that was specifically for my platform. I thank you, Roberto, for being here with me today and sharing with this. And I hope you all have, a good holiday season, whatever that looks like, or a cool Yule and a hairy mistress. And I just want to thank everyone that was here to support me for this. And best of holidays for you. So yes, Chris.
No,
Oh, you're waving goodbye. Okay. So I'm going to have everyone else jump off here. And so and I will, Jim and Tracy and Derek and San and Mary, thank you very much, and all those other Zoom users that are here. And I hope you have a very, very good season holiday.
And the same to all of you.
Okay.
Same to you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah.
Merry Christmas.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah's over, but
Yes, it is.
Yeah, he knows that.
Hope you had a good one.
Yeah,
Hope you had a good
yeah.
one.
thank you.
He knows that. Okay, so if you don't jump, I'm going to boot you out of the room because I say you can't stay. You don't have to leave your house, but you can't stay in this room. So,
Thank you.